A beacon in the darkness. The Galactic Concordium, a sprawling citadel that stretched across an entire asteroid belt, stood as the most powerful coalition in the known universe. Its shimmering walls reflected the light of distant stars, casting a cold, indifferent glow on the thousands of beings who had traveled from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. For eons, the Concordium had expanded its influence, swallowing up planets, enslaving species, and quashing any attempt at resistance. It was a force beyond comprehension, a machine built on the bones of countless civilizations. But today, something was different. Today, a spark of defiance had entered its hallowed halls. Humanity had made its mark in the stars, but their journey had been fraught with adversity. From the ashes of war and survival, humanity had risen, proving time and again that they were not to be underestimated. For centuries, the Galactic Concordium had watched humanity grow, dismissing their early attempts at interstellar diplomacy and viewing them as little more than a fleeting curiosity. But in recent years, humanity's influence had begun to spread, and with it, an undeniable sense of urgency had gripped the Concordium. Ambassador Alina Chin, the appointed envoy of Earth, stood at the center of the Grand Hall, her figure small but resolute. Her heart raced with the weight of the moment, but her posture remained unwavering. The Galactic Concordium's High Council, composed of the most powerful and ancient species in the galaxy, looked down upon her from their thrones, giant, intimidating figures with eyes that burned like coals, tentacles, mandibles, and sensory organs that darted in every direction. To them, she was but a fleeting human, a mere child compared to their vast, edgeless existence. But Alina knew better. "I come before you not as a supplicant," Alina's voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by the acoustics of the vast hall, but as a harbinger of the future. The words hung in the air, weighty and defiant. A murmur rippled through the assembly of delegates. The towering insectoid form of Sci-Fi, a representative from the Arxal race, clicked its mandibles in irritation, while a group of Zori delegates exchanged quick, flashing lights from their bioluminescent bodies. The room was alive with tension, but Alina did not falter. "For too long," Alina continued, her voice gaining strength, "humanity has observed your expansion, your subjugation of countless species, and your exploitation of entire worlds. We've seen the cultures you've obliterated, the lives you've stolen, and the galaxies you've conquered with impunity. And we've done nothing." The Zori delegate, who had been flashing rapidly in disagreement, ceased, his glowing patterns pulsing in a slower, more deliberate rhythm. The Arxal representatives remained silent, their many eyes watching Alina intently. But that ends today. The tension in the room thickened. The council's members, usually so composed, now showed signs of discomfort. They had heard whispers of human resilience, of their growing capabilities and ambitions. The atmosphere grew heavy as the High Council's supreme leader, the High Arbiter Threx, shifted in his seat. His gelatinous form shimmered with an unsettling glow. Threx was a being of immense age and power, his species having once ruled vast swaths of the galaxy before the Concordium's unification. To him, humanity was an insignificant blip in the cosmic order. "Your arrogance blinds you, human," Threx said, his voice low and commanding. "You stand before us, speaking of rebellion. Do you think you can sway the fate of the galaxy with such insignificant words?" Alina's eyes narrowed. She had expected this response, but she was prepared. "No," she said calmly, "I'm not here to sway your fate. I'm here to give you a choice that will determine whether your empire lives or dies." The delegates exchanged uncertain glances. The high leaders shifted in their seats. What Alina had just said was bold, unprecedented even. She was not here to beg for mercy. She was not here to negotiate. She was here to deliver an ultimatum. "We demand," Alina said, her voice rising, "that you cease your expansion, withdraw from the territories you've unjustly claimed, and grant independence to the species you've enslaved. If you refuse, the consequences will be severe." The chamber erupted in a roar of outrage. Shouts and growls filled the air. The Arxel delegates slammed their massive claws on the podiums, while the Zori sent flashing patterns of alarm. For a brief moment, chaos reigned as the council members tried to regain control. High Arbiter Threx's tentacles writhed, the eerie hiss of his exhalation filling the room. He raised a single powerful limb, and the uproar fell silent in an instant. "You threaten us with what?" Threx asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Your species is but a fledgling in the cosmic scale. We are the rulers of the galaxy. You are nothing." Elena met his gaze unwaveringly. "If you refuse," she said, "your worlds will burn. Your fleets will scatter, and your empire, built on the ashes of 1,000 civilizations, will crumble to dust." A wave of laughter erupted from the council members. The sound was harsh, mocking, yet it failed to unsettle Elena. She had prepared for this moment. She had prepared for their disbelief. "You think you can challenge us?" Threx's voice was now laced with condescension. "With your primitive technology, your scattered colonies, what can you possibly do?" Elena took a step forward, her expression resolute. "We are not like the species you have conquered," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her people's history. "We have learned, we have adapted, and we have prepared. If you refuse, you will know what it is like to face the fury of humanity." The room fell into a tense silence. The council members exchanged uneasy looks. The laughter had died down, replaced by an uncertainty that none of them had expected. High Arbiter Threx leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You threaten us with destruction, human," he said quietly. "You, whose home world we could crush beneath our heel with a single strike. Do you truly believe you can stand against us?" Elena's gaze did not waver. "We do not make threats, High Arbiter. We make promises." At that moment, the other delegates began to murmur amongst themselves. The seeds of doubt had been planted. The High Council, though powerful, had underestimated humanity for far too long. It was no longer a question of strength, it was a question of willpower. And humanity's will had been forged in the fire of countless battles. Elena had delivered her message. It was now up to the Concordium to decide whether they would bend the knee or face the consequences. The pulse of defiance. The silence in the chamber stretched on, each passing moment heavier than the last. The immense weight of High Arbiter Threx's words seemed to linger in the air like a poisonous cloud, yet the human ambassador, Elena Chin, remained as still as a rock. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and despite the enormity of the situation, her resolve only deepened. The ancient beings of the Galactic Concordium were powerful, their technology far beyond anything humanity could comprehend, but Elena knew something they did not. The true power of humanity was not in their ships, their weapons, or their colonies. It lay in their spirit. A low, guttural rumble rose from the council's various representatives, their words an unintelligible chorus of disbelief, anger, and mockery. It was clear that the thought of a human, a young species, standing up to the might of the Galactic Concordium was almost beyond their understanding. It was a spectacle they had not seen in millennia, a species that was not intimidated, not subjugated, but ready to fight for the very soul of the galaxy. Elena's eyes scanned the room, locking onto the various species that made up the Concordium. Her mind raced through the histories she had studied, the countless injustices committed in the name of the so-called Galactic Order. But history was not written in stone, it was shaped by those who had the courage to challenge it. Humanity was not a species defined by the past, they were a species built for the future. She could feel it in her bones, the pulse of humanity's defiance, stronger than ever, reverberating across the stars. "I think," a voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts, "we need to remind this human of her place." It was Felsa, the Zori representative, his bioluminescent patches flashing with irritation. His voice was sharp, like a blade drawn too quickly from its sheath. Felsa was a creature of light. His kind communicated through flashes and pulses, a language of brilliance and speed. To him, Elena was a mere spark in the vast cosmic dark, a fleeting disturbance in the natural order of things. "You are bold, human," Felsa continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "But boldness does not equal strength. You may have fire in your heart, but you lack the power to back it up. Your ships are primitive, your colonies few and scattered. The Concordium is the very foundation of the galaxy. You cannot challenge the natural hierarchy of this galaxy." Elena stood tall, her posture unwavering. She did not flinch at Felsa's words, nor did she respond in kind. She had heard this argument before, and she knew that those who relied on their strength alone were the first to fail. "You're right," Elena said, her voice calm but firm. "We may lack the sheer power you have. We may not control vast swaths of the galaxy like you do. But that doesn't mean we are powerless. It means we are capable of something far more dangerous, the ability to change, to adapt, to innovate, to unite. We have faced insurmountable odds before, and we will face them again. And when we do, we will not bow to the likes of you." A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. For the first time, some of the Concordium delegates were starting to question the certainty they had held for so long. The Zori, known for their incredible intellect and technological prowess, shifted uncomfortably. The Arxel, whose insectoid species had a deep-rooted tradition of conquest, seemed less certain of their superiority. The very foundations of their empire were being challenged, not with force, but with the power of will. The High Arbiter remained silent for a moment, his enormous form shimmering in the low light. His multi-limbed body moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy nature, his translucent skin reflecting the stars outside. He stared at Elena, and for the briefest of moments, she saw something flicker in his many eyes, something that resembled doubt. "You speak of change, human," Vrex finally said, his voice low and ominous. "But change comes with consequences. Your species has no understanding of the power you are provoking. Do you truly believe that the Concordium will simply bend to your demands?" Elena took a slow breath, the weight of her next words hanging in the air. She was about to offer the Concordium something they had never considered, a choice. A choice that would decide whether the galaxy would remain under their iron fist, or whether a new dawn would rise, one where humanity led the way. "We have already made our choice," Elena said, her voice steady. "Humanity will not kneel. We will not beg for scraps from your table. You will either comply with our demands, or you will face the consequences. I promise you, if we must, we will show you the strength of our will." A low murmur of disbelief rose from the delegates. The Zori delegates' bioluminescence flickered erratically. The Arxel hissed in frustration, their many eyes narrowing. They had never encountered such resistance, such resolve from a species they had once deemed insignificant. Elena's words were not just a challenge, they were a declaration, and for the first time in centuries, the Concordium was faced with the reality that they might not be the ultimate authority in the galaxy. But the real shock came when another voice, one that had been absent until now, cut through the murmur of confusion. It was the voice of Gorak, an elderly delegate from the Monrath, a species known for their unshakable neutrality and wisdom. The Monrath had never taken sides in the many conflicts of the galaxy, preferring instead to observe and record the rise and fall of empires. They were known for their patience and their profound understanding of the cosmos. But when Gorak spoke, his voice was heavy with the gravity of ages. "Perhaps it is time to consider that the galaxy has changed," Gorak said, his ancient voice calm but resonant. "Perhaps it is time for the Concordium to acknowledge that it is no longer the only force in the universe. The humans, they may be onto something." The room fell into complete silence. Gorak's words were not a declaration of war or rebellion, but a statement of possibility. It was the first crack in the Concordium's monolithic stance, and that crack, though small, was enough to give Elena hope. The tension in the room was palpable, and the delegates knew the conversation was at a crossroads. Would the Concordium double down on its centuries-old reign, or would they recognize the shifting winds of change? Elena, with her unwavering resolve, had set the stage. Now it was up to the galaxy to decide its future. For the first time in their history, the Concordium was faced with a question they had never considered before. Could humanity, young, resilient, and unpredictable, be the catalyst for the galaxy's rebirth? And if so, what would that mean for the balance of power that had held the stars in its grasp for millennia? Alina stood silently as the delegates debated, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this was just the beginning. No matter how the Concordium responded, this was the first step in humanity's struggle to carve its place in the galaxy. And with every word she spoke, the flame of defiance burned brighter. The edge of rebellion. The chamber was thick with tension. The once imposing figures of the Galactic Concordium's council, those who had commanded the universe for centuries, now seemed uncertain, their previously unshakable confidence rattled by the human ambassador's unrelenting stance. For the first time in eons, they were faced with a species that would not bow, a species that would not be cowed by their threats or their might. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and though some of the delegates continued to whisper in haughty tones, others were beginning to question the assumptions that had guided their every decision. Alina Chin stood as still as a mountain, her gaze unwavering, though her mind was in constant motion. She had seen the cracks in the Concordium's unity, and she had every intention of widening them. Her mission was far from over. This was just the beginning. The next steps were even more crucial than the ultimatum she had just delivered. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. If humanity succeeded here, it would not only reshape the galaxy, it would rewrite the very fabric of power itself. The Galactic Concordium was built on the bones of conquered civilizations, but its strength had come from one simple truth: no one had ever dared stand against them for long. That was the advantage they had always relied upon: fear. Fear that no species could survive their might. Fear that no one could ever challenge their place at the top of the galactic order. But humanity had nothing left to fear. High Arbiter Threx, Elena began again, her voice cutting through the hushed murmurs. I did not come here to negotiate. I did not come here to beg for mercy. I came to deliver a warning. We have watched, we have learned, and we have prepared. You, who think yourselves invincible, have underestimated humanity's resolve. Your empire is not eternal. For a brief moment, there was an almost imperceptible shift in Threx's posture. An ancient being whose species had long been regarded as the epitome of dominance, yet now seemed less certain of the future that he had once taken for granted. His many eyes, usually sharp and calculating, blinked slowly, as if considering the true weight of Alina's words for the first time. You are a brave human. Threx's voice boomed, though there was a trace of something softer in it, something that spoke of a deeper recognition. But bravery alone cannot sustain you. The Concordium does not bow to threats. If you persist with these demands, there will be consequences. You will regret ever crossing us. But Alina did not flinch. Instead, she let the silence stretch, drawing out the discomfort that was now palpable in the room. For the first time, she had planted the seed of doubt in the heart of the Concordium. The tone had shifted from mockery to something more cautious, something more aware. Humanity had managed to do what had once seemed impossible, to challenge the unquestionable. Let me make something very clear, Elena said, her voice steady and resolute. Humanity will not be intimidated by your threats. If you think we are afraid to fight, you are mistaken. We are prepared to face the consequences, whatever they may be. But mark my words, the consequences for you will be far greater than anything you could imagine. The chamber fell silent again. For the first time, Alina's words were not dismissed as the ramblings of a weaker species. They were being weighed and measured by the very beings who had never once considered that such defiance could come from a species so young. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. This was a defining moment in galactic history. There was a long pause before the Arxal delegate, Sci-Fi, broke the silence with a harsh clicking of its mandibles. The insectoid species, known for their ruthlessness and their hive-like mentality, were rarely moved by threats or challenges. Their empire had spanned centuries, and they had conquered countless worlds. Yet, Kaifar's voice held a trace of uncertainty. "You speak of consequences," Kaifar said, its many eyes narrowing as it regarded Alina with something akin to suspicion. "But what does humanity have to offer? What can you do that we have not already anticipated? You are a primitive species, nothing more than an infant in the vastness of the galaxy." Alina's gaze never wavered as she turned toward the Arxel representative. "We may be young, but we are not naive," she said, her voice sharp, every word carrying the weight of generations of struggle. "We have watched the Concordium for centuries. We have studied your methods, your strategies, and we know your weaknesses. And we have prepared for the day when we would be forced to stand up to you." A murmur of disbelief swept through the chamber. The delegates of the Concordium were still incredulous, unable to fully accept the reality that a species so young, so new to the galactic stage, had not only learned to survive, but to thrive under the very shadow of the Concordium's might. The Zori delegate, usually a silent observer, emitted a series of bright, erratic flashes, his bioluminescence flickering in agitation. "You claim to have prepared." Felsa, the Zori delegate, spoke up, his voice thick with skepticism. "But how do you intend to back up such a bold declaration? Do you think your primitive ships, your limited technology, could ever stand up to the power of the Concordium? We have fleets that can wipe out entire systems in the blink of an eye. We have weapons that make your strongest armaments look like toys. How will you face us when the time comes?" Alina didn't flinch. "We may not have the same weapons, but we have something far more powerful: unity. The strength of humanity lies in its ability to work together, to innovate under pressure, and to overcome even the most impossible odds. You might be able to crush our ships, our colonies, but you cannot crush our will. And that, Felsa, is something you will never understand until it's too late." A cold silence followed as the delegates processed her words. The atmosphere in the chamber had shifted once more. The smugness that had once filled the room now seemed like a distant memory. They were beginning to realize that humanity was not as insignificant as they had once thought. There was power in the human spirit, a raw, untapped energy that had the potential to reshape the very foundations of the galaxy. High Arbiter Threx leaned forward, his translucent form rippling with the weight of his thoughts. "Perhaps," he began slowly, "it is time we take this threat seriously. Perhaps the human species is not as weak as we have believed, but we will not simply cower before your demands. You will need more than words to convince the Concordium of your resolve." Alina's expression hardened, her voice becoming even more resolute. "And you will have more than words, High Arbiter. When the time comes, you will understand the price of underestimating humanity." As the delegates of the Concordium continued to deliberate, Alina remained steadfast, her heart pounding with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The battle for the future of the galaxy was far from over, but with every word, every exchange, humanity's strength was becoming more undeniable. They would no longer be silent in the face of tyranny, and soon the entire galaxy would know the cost of crossing them. As the meeting adjourned, Alina Chin left the chamber with her head held high. The Concordium had been rattled, but they had not yet been defeated. The real battle was only just beginning, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The fires of resolve. The echo of the Galactic Concordium's council chamber door closing behind Alina Chin seemed to reverberate in the corridors long after she had left. The weight of the encounter lingered heavily, but she could not afford to dwell on it. As she walked through the sterile hallways, the flickering lights overhead seemed to mock her calm composure. She had just made an unprecedented declaration, an ultimatum that had sent shockwaves through the heart of the galaxy's most powerful empire. Yet she knew, deep down, that her words were only the beginning of something much larger, something that would either shape the future of humanity or mark the end of their fragile hope. Alina's steps were firm, each one carrying her closer to the next phase of her mission. She had set the stage, but now it was time for humanity to prove their resolve. The Concordium had shown its hand, arrogance and dismissal. They still believed they could crush humanity with their might. But Alina knew that the Concordium had underestimated what humans were capable of. They did not yet understand the true power of unity, of ingenuity, and of the human will. The dawn of humanity's resolve. Back aboard her ship, the Vanguard, Alina stood at the command deck, her hands gripping the cold metal railing as she gazed out at the stars. She was not alone in her thoughts. Beside her stood Commander Darius Kellen, a seasoned officer who had seen the horrors of the galaxy's many wars. His dark eyes were fixed on the stars, but his mind was far from the peaceful beauty of the cosmos. Like Alina, Darius was a soldier, but unlike most in the fleet, he was not driven by a thirst for conquest. He was driven by a desire for justice, something the Concordium had long since abandoned. "Do you think they'll comply?" Darius asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Alina turned toward him, meeting his gaze. "I think they're scared," she said, her voice calm but fierce. "They've never faced an enemy like us before, an enemy that doesn't fear them." Darius nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You've thrown down the gauntlet, Alina. But it's not just words. You've given them an ultimatum. We're going to need every advantage we can get. The Concordium won't back down easily." "I know," she replied. "That's why we're not waiting for them to make the first move. We need to show them that humanity is not only capable of fighting back, but that we've already started." The human advantage. The Concordium was a vast empire, but in its vastness lay a crucial weakness: its bureaucracy. Thousands of species, millions of star systems, all governed under a single monolithic structure that had become bloated and slow. Humanity, on the other hand, had spent centuries adapting to survival in a harsh, unforgiving galaxy. They had learned to be resourceful, to think quickly, and to act decisively. It was this adaptability that had allowed them to thrive, even when they were outgunned and outnumbered. Alina had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering intelligence, forging alliances, and securing resources. The human fleet was small compared to the Concordium's, but it was agile. The ships were faster, more flexible, and designed to fight in ways that the Concordium's behemoth warships simply could not match. But it wasn't just the ships or the weapons that would give humanity the edge. It was the human spirit itself. The willingness to innovate, to push boundaries, and to take risks was something that no empire, no matter how powerful, could predict. "We're ready," Darius said, breaking Alina from her reverie. "The fleet is prepped, and our allies are in place. If we're going to strike, now is the time." Alina nodded, her mind racing with the weight of the decision before her. She had already given the Concordium an ultimatum, but now it was time to make good on it. The full might of humanity's resolve was about to be tested. The question was, would the Concordium finally see them for what they were, or would they meet them with the same arrogance that had brought the galaxy to the brink of destruction? The first strike. The decision was made. Alina activated the ship's comm system, addressing the fleet leaders, all of whom had gathered to hear her orders. "We've given the Concordium a chance to comply," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "But now it's time to show them that we are not to be trifled with. We will strike first, and we will do it in a way they will never expect. We're not just going to fight. We're going to outsmart them, outmaneuver them, and show them that humanity is not to be underestimated." The officers around her nodded, their faces set in grim determination. The battle was not going to be easy. There would be losses, there always were in war, but they knew what was at stake. The future of humanity was at stake. The future of the galaxy itself could hinge on what they did in the coming hours. The Vanguard slipped silently out of the hidden starbase where it had been preparing for this moment. The fleet followed, a small but highly capable force that was designed for precision strikes. They would strike deep into the heart of the Concordium's territory, hitting targets that would cripple their supply lines and send a clear message. The Concordium would understand that humanity was serious, that they were not afraid to fight. As the ships neared their first target, the coordinates for the first strike were locked in. Alina stood at the helm, her hands steady on the controls. She looked out into the vast emptiness of space, the cold abyss stretching endlessly before her. In that moment, she felt the weight of her people's history pressing down on her, but she also felt something else: hope. Humanity had come a long way since the days of their first tentative steps into space. They had faced extinction, overcome obstacles that would have broken lesser species, and now they were standing at the precipice of something truly monumental. They were on the cusp of becoming more than just survivors. They were about to become the catalysts of change. A message to the galaxy, the first strike hit with precision. A well-placed series of explosions disabled key Concordium supply stations in the distant system of Jatora. The station, a hub for the Concordium's military logistics, was rendered useless in a matter of moments. The Concordium's response was immediate, but slow. They had been caught off guard. The human fleet had struck with the swiftness of a predator, leaving little room for retaliation. But Elena knew this was only the beginning. The Concordium would retaliate, of course. They would unleash their full might against humanity. But what they didn't understand was that humanity was prepared. This strike was just a taste of what was to come. "We've made our mark," Darius said, his voice filled with satisfaction as they watched the flames of the explosion ripple across the stars. "Now we wait for their response." Elena's eyes remained focused on the view before her, her expression unreadable. "This is just the first step," she said quietly. "We've only just begun. The galaxy is about to change, and we'll be the ones leading the charge." As the fleet set course for the next target, Elena couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility she carried. Humanity had always been an underdog in the grand scheme of the galaxy, but no longer. Today, they had proven that they were a force to be reckoned with, and this was only the beginning. The fires of resolve burned bright, and nothing would extinguish them. The future of the galaxy was now in humanity's hands, and they would not falter. The unyielding tide. The galaxy had always been a vast, unfathomable expanse, full of untold possibilities, alien civilizations, and countless stars. For millennia, the Galactic Concordium had reigned over it, a vast empire built on the subjugation of others. But today, the very foundation of that empire was trembling, shaken by a single species that refused to be crushed by the weight of centuries-old tyranny, humanity. Elena Chin stood in the command center of the Vanguard, her gaze fixed on the swirling mass of stars displayed on the ship's holoscreen. Each star represented a battle fought, a victory won, or a challenge to come. The strike against the Zerptora supply station had sent ripples through the Concordium, and the responses had been swift, though lacking the intensity she had expected. For the first time, they were uncertain, unprepared for a threat that had not come in the form they anticipated. The Concordium was still reeling from the surprise attack. Their military forces, vast as they were not designed for rapid, decisive warfare. Their fleets were enormous, but their movements slow. Humanity, on the other hand, had learned long ago that survival depended on speed, on innovation, and on the ability to adapt to any situation. And it was this very adaptability that would tip the scales in their favor. Humanity's first wave of resistance. The Vanguard slipped through the galaxy's darkest reaches, its small, nimble form barely detectable on any Concordium scanners. In the wake of their first strike, the human fleet had spread out, each ship tasked with a different mission. Some ships would focus on sabotage, hitting vital supply chains and communication hubs. Others would target Concordium outposts, systems far from the heart of the Empire where their response would be slower. The plan was simple but effective. Destabilize the Concordium's infrastructure, weaken their forces, and buy time. Time for what? Time to show the galaxy that humanity wasn't just an insect buzzing around a sleeping giant. They were an inevitable force, capable of reshaping the very balance of power in the cosmos. Elena knew the Concordium would retaliate. The Empire had vast fleets, weapons of unimaginable destruction, and an entire army of species that had been bred for war. But humanity's greatest weapon had never been brute force. It was something far subtler, far more dangerous. It was the power of ingenuity, of collective will, and of a species that had, against all odds, carved a place for itself in the stars. "Our forces are ready." Commander Darius Kellen's voice broke through her thoughts, his voice strong, but tempered with the weight of what was coming. "The first wave is complete. We've made our mark, but now the true challenge begins. The Concordium will retaliate soon. They will come after us in full force." Elena's gaze turned to him, her face hard with resolve. "They may retaliate, but they'll do so with uncertainty. They don't understand us. They don't understand what we are capable of when we're backed into a corner." She paused, allowing her words to settle. "We've already shown them that we can hurt them. We can take their systems down. Now we need to push forward. Every move we make from here on out will be watched by every species in the galaxy. They're waiting to see if humanity is truly capable of toppling the greatest empire the galaxy has ever known." "Then let's show them," Darius said, a quiet fire burning in his eyes. The consequences of defiance. The human fleet was already moving toward their next target, a major Concordium mining operation on the fringe of a far-off system. The Concordium had always relied on these operations to feed their war machine, gathering resources from planets and moons throughout the galaxy. Without these resources, their ships would falter, their military might would diminish, and their empire would begin to fracture. The Vanguard slipped through the stars, its engines humming low and steady as the fleet made its approach. The target was a moon orbiting a gas giant, a place where the Concordium had been extracting minerals for centuries. Elena and Darius knew this would be their hardest hit yet. It wasn't just a mining colony, it was a hub that supplied one of the most powerful factions of the Concordium with the materials needed to build their warships. Taking it out could severely hinder their military capabilities, but it would also send a message. Humanity would no longer sit quietly in the shadows. Humanity had teeth, and those teeth would bite back. Elena stood at the bridge, her eyes scanning the holographic map of the region. "We're moving in on the moon's defense grid. It's heavily guarded, but it's not invincible," she said, her voice calm yet filled with purpose. Darius glanced at the tactical readouts. "The defenses are formidable, but if we hit them fast, if we target their communications and their resource collection facilities, we can cripple their operation before they have time to react. It won't be easy, but it's our best shot." Elena nodded, her mind already calculating the necessary maneuvers. She had been trained for moments like this. No matter how overwhelming the odds, the human advantage lay in their adaptability. If they could strike quickly and decisively, they could disrupt the Concordium's operations long enough to force them into a defensive posture. "All ships are in position," Darius said. "Let's move." The battle for Zanara. As the fleet entered the moon's orbit, Elena could feel the tension rise. The Concordium's defensive grid was a formidable structure designed to deter any unwanted visitors. The mining colony itself was protected by fleets of drones, automated defense cannons, and a small fleet of Concordium warships that orbited the planet like watchful sentinels. "Time to hit them where it hurts," Elena muttered to herself. "On your mark, Ambassador," Darius said, his eyes narrowing as he studied the incoming data. "We're almost in range of the first defense satellite." "Initiating attack now," Elena replied. The Vanguard unleashed its first salvo, sending a series of precisely targeted missiles toward the satellite defense grid. The explosions rang out like distant thunder as the missiles struck their targets, disabling the defense satellites in a series of rapid, coordinated blasts. The Concordian ships, still in the midst of reorienting to their new positions, scrambled to respond. "We've breached the outer defenses," Darius said, his voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "The path is clear for the next wave." Elena's heart pounded in her chest, but she remained calm. This was what they had been preparing for. This was the moment when humanity would prove its worth. The first wave of fighters, nimble and fast, darted past the debris of destroyed satellites, making their way toward the heart of the colony. The Vanguard moved in behind them, its weapons primed, ready to take on whatever the Concordium could throw at them. "Prepare for the final strike," Elena commanded. In an instant, the fleet unleashed everything they had. Missiles, plasma bolts, and disruptor beams rained down on the Concordium's mining base. Explosions rocked the surface of the moon, sending clouds of debris into space. The human fleet was relentless, moving like a well-oiled machine, precise and deadly. Within moments, the moon's resource facilities were crippled, and the remaining Concordium warships were scattered, unable to regroup in time. As the last of the Concordian defenses crumbled, Elena allowed herself a brief moment of victory. They had done it. The moon was theirs, its strategic importance neutralized, and the Concordium's grip on the region was broken. But Elena knew that this was only the beginning. The true war had yet to come. The Concordium would retaliate, and they would retaliate with everything they had. The next move would be theirs, and humanity had no intention of retreating. "Mission accomplished," Darius said, his voice filled with pride. Elena's gaze turned once more to the stars. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. "The galaxy will never be the same again." Humanity had crossed the Rubicon. The question now was how far they would go before the galaxy's greatest empire was forced to its knees.